After looking at a lot of Greensboro condos and townhomes for a couple of times now, I kind of quickly realized that it's very hard for you to achieve a target return of like 8% if you don't get below like 125 and 150 grand type of threshold, right? So today, what I'm doing is pulling up certain properties, and it seems like it's only in this little pocket in Holden Farms and this area over here where people actually have listings that are sub 125 grand. So let's see, 301. Let's look at this property right here. It's listed 3109 Darden Road, Unit B, as in Bravo, Greensboro, North Carolina, 27407. And this property, for the most part, I mean, if this is really how it looks like upon inspection, it looks like it's pretty much ready to go. Like someone already renovated it. Like there's not that much work that needs to take place there. So it's a two bedroom, two bath, 984 square feet. Now, obviously, I don't know anything about the crime stats here, but I would rely on the local team that knows the area. Honestly, if you try to get contractors out there and they don't feel comfortable going out there, either at night or your realtor doesn't feel comfortable going out there, I mean, that's a red flag. I mean, I've seen contractors not want to go to certain areas at a certain amount of time. And when I was like looking at Birmingham, right? So that's a pretty good sign of people not trying to go to certain places. All right. So now that I got this property here, there's a couple of data points you want to gather, right? The first data point you want to gather is how much are you going to be able to get for rent? Now, typically what we do is I will go for a hot FMR and I will click on the top listing and I will click on access to smart FMRs and I will click on FY 2025 smart FMRs. I'll pick the state and I would pick the county. I'm pretty sure this property is in where's the county? What county is this in? Wait, where's the county? Why is this not control find out where I'm working? It's so weird. Wait, Greensboro, let's see, county. Oh, Guilford. Okay. I don't know why it wasn't popping up. That's such a weird UI change there. All right, Guilford County. So you look up Guilford County, you're going to see what the HUD FMR is by bedroom count by zip code. This is 27409. So you can kind of see that 27409. The maximum rent here is 1250 for your HUD FMR. Now, if you look up the 2025 Greensboro Housing Authority payment standards, you're going to see that it's actually 1250. Greensboro, North Carolina. So I can find a link for you. Oh, I was just looking at yesterday. That's interesting. That came up yesterday, but it didn't come up today. Wow, interesting. Payment standard. There you go. Right here it says the two bedroom payment standards are for a two bedroom is 1247. Now you might be wondering why, right? The payment standards is inclusive of utilities. So typically, the rule is the payment standards might be a little higher than HUD FMR, but if you don't cover utilities, you have to start deducting the utility allowances by your payment standards. So 1247 might be your all-in payment standards, but if you don't cover, let's say, electricity for air conditioning or whatever, right? You might have to lower it by $50, right? If that's the utility allowance for a two bedroom condo or a two bedroom single family home or two bedroom single townhome. The type of asset matters, and you have to make those deductions accordingly. Now, the last factor you would have to figure out is you have to figure out what is my market rent because of a test called the rent reasonableness test. All right, let me kind of go back here. So what you would do is go to affordablehousing.com. You go to the owner section, you go to the market rent estimator, you plug in the address, plug in the bedroom count, and you can see that on average, the rent for 7 units within a 0.16 mile radius is 983. Okay. So now that you know it's 983, but then you know that the payment center is 1247, I'm going to leave these factors in here just because my partners already know how I analyze deals. And I'd like to plug them in to make it super easy. So this is a 110 grand deal. There is no rehab essentially, right? I don't need to paint this property. I don't need to do LVP on this property. I don't need to do carpet. I might just set aside a little bit of money to turn the toilets into high pressure flush toilets because I've never gotten a clogged toilet call before with high pressure flush toilets. And it gives me a total rehab of about just $1,000. Okay, good. So I just have a little bit just in case if something happens, right? So let's go ahead and plug in some numbers here. Now for my rent, I'm going to use 1250 just because my colleagues in North Carolina have told me that this is roughly what the Greensboro Housing Authority is issuing for two-bedroom condos. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to stay that way, right? If they see that the rent market is dropping, guess what? Sometimes the rent reasonableness test will kick in. And I'm showing you right now the Housing Choice Voucher Program guidebook. Housing Choice Voucher is what was previously known as Section 8. And when they had all this negative connotation with Section 8, they rebranded it from Section 8 to the Housing Choice Voucher Program Guidebook. That's what allows you to kind of get away from all negative connotations. But if you go to the guidebook in Section 2.2, you're going to see that in comparability section, it says that in conducting rent reasonableness, the PHA must determine whether the rent to the owner is a reasonable rent in comparison to rent for the other comparable unassisted units. So this means that you can't charge more rent to someone simply because they are a voucher holder, right? For the obvious reasons. Now, the size, unit type matters, but typically, if you are comparing two bedrooms to two bedrooms, chances are they're apartments, right? You don't see that many two-bedroom single family homes. You do it occasionally, but not always. So now this tells you that, hey, within 0.16 mile radius, the average rent is 93. So unless your property has really good finish, which in this case I do think so, but your average rent might be 983. So when you underwrite this property, right? Sometimes people have this fear of like, hey, worst case scenario, blah, blah, blah. But you're gonna want to do this, right? You're gonna want to check out what's going on. So 983 is right here. Property taxes. Let's see what's going on here. Let's see what my estimate is for property taxes. 73 for property taxes. 43 for home insurance, and a $200 HOA. That's pretty hefty HOA in my opinion. So that can swing your numbers a lot. So if I do 983, actually let's do 1250 first, and I'll show you the worst case scenario of 983 afterwards. I got 10% of my rent set aside for property management. I got 5% for vacancy expenses. Now, typically when you see me underwriting my old single family homes, I was putting in 10%. But I'm putting 5% right now because I'm assuming that this HOA of $200, it's pretty hefty, but some of that money is going to go towards replacing the roof, right? Some of the big capital expenditure items. So I'm comfortable leaving this as 5% because I know my HOA of 200 is covering for it. Now, this should never be zero, right? Chances are you're going to have to do something, right? You're going to do something to get your property rented. And if you put in zero, that means you are underestimating your expenses and overestimating your profitability. You don't want to be that person that does that, right? Because there's some people out there that will teach you, oh, this is my rent, this is my mortgage, and that's my cash flow. And they forget about all these other expenses. It's kind of like that roof is going to get replaced at some point, right? You know that a water heater is going to get replaced at some point. Same thing for your air conditioner. So why on earth would you put zero for maintenance? That doesn't make any sense. That money doesn't belong to you. Same thing for vacancy, right? You know that eventually someone's going to move out of the property. It will happen. I don't know when, but it will, right? People pass away, people move on, people move for life circumstances. So it should never be zero. All right. Just be very mindful of that. So now that you got 25% down for your down payment on here, so I'll put in 27,500, which is a result of B4, which is my asking price, times my down payment percentage in 25%. I got 2.5% for my closing costs, $1,000 for my renovations. My financing amount is going to be about roughly around 7.5% right now for interest rate. My financing amount is going to equal to my B4, which is my asking price, minus my cash or seller. So that's 82,500. So if I rent this property out as a two bedroom for 1250, right? I will cash flow $107 a month. That's a 4.1% return. Assuming I bought this product for 110 grand for 12 with a $1,000 rehab, just rounding here, 25% down and 7.5% interest rate. Great. Now, what do I need to do if I were to, let's say, reach a return of 8%? What if my target is 8% return on year one, right? After all my expenses. If I go to 100 grand, I'm almost there. If I go to 95 grand, now I'm at 8%. So maybe I can go to 97. There you go. That still works. So my highest price that I would pay for a property that's relatively turnkey with a $1,000 rehab, assuming everything else stays the same, I can get 1250, right? I'll have to buy this property for only 175 bucks, and that's a 7.6% return, which rounds up to 8. Now, here's the kicker. What if your rent was only 983, which is what we saw earlier, and that meets the reasonableness test, right? Well, now you're losing money in 97 grand. You might have to buy this property for, whoops, don't do any zeros, 65 grand, right? That's the difference between getting your rent right or not. If you don't have intel, like real good data from another investor that might be renting out in your area in the same complex for 1250, it's going to be really hard for you to make this deal work at 97 grand. But if you have that information, then now all of a sudden, right, somebody else might be interpreting this area and say, hey, I can't make money unless it's 65 grand. And that's a great example of how having access to different information, which is why you listen to this podcast, right? Which is why you listen to the guests on the podcast that share with you some of the real life numbers that they're getting on their properties. This is why you listen. This is why you got to figure out, how do I get better information? Meaning, can I work with another property management company that has Section 8 rentals that can tell me exactly what this property might rent for based on my data? You can ask that probably just by calling your property management company, because getting that piece of data point, that's going to be the difference between you paying 97 grand for a property versus 65 grand for a property. All right. Now, let's say we'll go back to 1250, right? That's my rent because that's what a fellow colleague there says it. But my interest rates drop from 7.5 to 6.5%. So now instead of 97 grand, right, which is this scenario right here, let's say I'm going to 102 grand. Great, that's still a deal. 103, still a deal. Okay, so just because my interest rate dropped 1 point, I can now pay $6,000 more worth versus the $97,000 price, right? Assuming I can rent this property for 1250, because now I can cash for 196 a month, and that's a 8% return cash on cash. So pay very close attention to what's happening within mortgage rates right now, right? The mortgage rates are driven by two things. It's driven by let me show you this, 30-year mortgage interest rate versus 10-year yield graph. And you can see that it's affected by two things. In general, interest rates for mortgages are affected by two factors. One is the 10-year yield, the 10-year treasury yield interest rate, and the spread between the 10-year yield and the 30-year mortgage interest rates. Now, historically, that spread was like 1.5 to 2%, but we've seen it going as high as 2.5, 3%, right? You can kind of see what's going on. It's kind of insane what's happening here. So be very mindful, because all it takes is maybe there's some positive news around tariff deadlines. Usually it's not so headline driven, right? It's really driven by the bond traders, but the bond traders right now are extremely sensitive. You usually never see that much volatility when it comes to interest rates. But if the spreads narrow because they have a little bit more confidence, and the interest rates drop a little bit because they have more confidence in the tariff deals being done, etc., now all of a sudden you can really get a 1 point move overnight in interest rates. It's very possible. So when that happens, guess what? Now you can be willing to pay $6,000 more for the property. So now you're only $7,000 away from the 110 list price instead of 13,000. And that's the difference between getting a deal and not getting a deal. but you're remaining unemotional about it. You're sticking to the numbers and you're messing with all the levers, just how we talked about today. All right. So I hope this was helpful, everybody. I mean, my goal is this: I hope you analyze the same deal I analyzed today using the same spreadsheet. You guys need a copy of the spreadsheet, go to affordablehousing.io, go to the get deal analysis tool. It's a faster for you to get a copy of the spreadsheet. And my hope is this: I hope you copy my homework today. I hope you analyze the same deal that I analyzed today using the same spreadsheet. Because guess what? At some point, someone's going to ask you, hey, why do you think this is a deal? And at that point in time, you might say, hey, I've been looking at deals for the past 630 days. And I've seen so many deals that were not deals. Might that give yourself some confidence that you know what you're doing? I certainly hope so. I really do hope so. All right. I hope you all have an amazing day, everybody. I hope you spend some quality time with your family and friends today, because that's what life is all about. All right. Have an amazing Friday. If I don't see you this weekend, have a great weekend. But I'm going to stay consistent. I'm going to keep recording. And I'll see you all tomorrow for day 631. Have a good one, everybody.